valley. Green hills folding down to a stream, and one person standing in the middle of it. They were born here, in one of these huts on a night no one wrote down. They'll grow up here, learn every tree, every bend in the water, every face in the village. Because it's the same few dozen faces, their whole life. They'll grow old here, and one day they'll be buried here, in the same soil they were born on top of. They will never leave this valley. Not once. Not to see what's over that ridge. The line of hills on the horizon is, as far as they will ever know, roughly where the world ends. And here's the thing your imagination gets wrong. When you picture ancient humans, you picture movement, wanderers, nomads, restless little bands crossing empty land under an enormous sky. And sometimes, sure, but zoom in on a single life. Almost any single life for almost all of human history, and you find something much smaller and much, much stiller. You find a person who spent their entire existence inside a space you could walk across before lunch. Try to actually feel how small that world was. Everyone you would ever love, every meal you would ever eat, every argument, every secret, everything you would ever lay eyes on, inside a single bowl of land a few miles wide. In a world like that, a stranger isn't a face you don't recognize. A stranger is an event. People might talk about the time a man came through from 2 valleys over for the rest of their lives. That's one thing. But here's where it stops being a story I'm telling you and becomes something we can check. Because we can read it off the dead. When a person grows up somewhere, the water they drink leaves a signature in their teeth, a faint chemical fingerprint of the local rock and soil locked into the enamel, and it never changes again. Bones keep updating through your life, but teeth are frozen in childhood. So the teeth tell you where someone began. The bones tell you where they ended up. Put them together, and a skeleton becomes a map of a life. And we have a body. 5,000 years ago, a man died high in the Alps and froze into a glacier, and stayed there, whole, until 2 hikers found him melting out of the ice in 1991. We call him Ötzi. He's so perfectly preserved that scientists could reconstruct his entire life out of his chemistry. He was born in a valley on the southern side of the Alps. As a grown man, he lived in another valley, a little further along, and he died on a high pass between them. The entire range of his life, cradle to frozen corpse, fit inside about 37 miles. 37 miles. That was the whole map, the complete diameter of a human existence 5,000 years ago, beginning to end. A circle smaller than a lot of people's drive to work. And here's the part that matters. Ötzi is not the strange one. He's the normal one. Grave after grave, when the isotopes come back, the teeth say the same quiet thing over and over. Born here, died here, never went far. That was a life. A full, complete, ordinary life. That's one thing, but every so often, the teeth say something else entirely. Near Stonehenge, archaeologists opened a grave. A man buried a little over 4,000 years ago, and his teeth did not match the English ground he'd been lying in for millennia. He had grown up somewhere cold and high and far, the foothills of the Alps. Hundreds of miles away, across a sea and a whole continent. He had come an almost unthinkable distance. And you can measure exactly how rare that was by looking at how they buried him. His was the richest grave anyone has ever found in Britain from that entire age. Around 100 objects laid in with him, the oldest gold ever discovered on the island. Archaeologists nicknamed him the King of Stonehenge, though he almost certainly wasn't a king. He was something stranger to them than a king. He was a man who had crossed an impossible distance and lived, and walked in carrying skills from the far edge of the known world. To the people who buried him, distance itself was a kind of magic. A person who had come that far was very nearly a wizard. So you didn't just bury him, you buried him with gold. That's what travel meant for almost all of human history. Not a holiday, a miracle, a thing so rare that surviving it made you legendary. So now, here's the strange part, the genuinely strange part. This same species, made almost entirely of people who never left their valley, people who treated one long-distance traveler like a sorcerer and packed his grave with treasure. This species is the only animal on Earth that lives everywhere. Not lots of places, everywhere. We walked out of Africa, and we did not stop. Australia, the frozen roof of Siberia, the Americas, top to bottom, pole to pole. Islands so far out in the empty Pacific, you could sail for weeks and see nothing but water. We found those too. There is no other large creature on this planet even close to as absurdly, ridiculously spread out as we are. A species of homebodies quietly colonized the entire world. How? Here's how. And it might be the quietest fact in this whole story. Nobody made the trip. No single person walked from Africa to the tip of South America. No one set out to cross a planet. That journey, the one that ends with humans on every continent and footprints on the moon, was never taken, start to finish, by anybody. It was taken by everybody, without a single one of them noticing. Because each generation drifted just a little past the last, a valley over, a new stretch of coastline because the old one was getting crowded, 10 miles further than your parents got, across an entire lifetime. And usually not even that. And every one of those people thought of themselves, correctly, as someone who stayed home, who lived and died where they belonged. But stack up enough of those tiny, rooted, homebound lives, a few miles of drift times 10,000 years, and you get a species standing on the moon. The single greatest journey in the history of life on Earth was made step by step by people who each swore they never went anywhere. And it was slow. The edge of the human world crept forward at the speed of moss. It took tens of thousands of years just to seep from Africa to Australia. The Americas didn't fill with people until near the very end of that story. And the last empty lands, islands like New Zealand, only felt their first human footprint around 700 years ago. Some of the ground you think of as impossibly ancient was reached more recently than some of the cathedrals in Europe. The map of humanity was never conquered. It was soaked into, one quiet life at a time. And your ancestors, very nearly all of them, are in that story as the still points, the ones who stayed. Their entire lives, the whole circle of everything they ever saw or did, would fit inside a space you'd cross without thinking about it, before your coffee went cold. Because here is the number that should stop you where you sit. The average person today moves about 42 miles in a single ordinary day. The commute, the errands, the drive you won't even remember taking. 42 miles, and you'd call that a slow Tuesday. Utzi's whole life fit inside 37. You travel farther before dinner than a Copper Age man traveled between the day he was born and the day he died. You have already, today, outwandered almost every human being who has ever lived. And you did it sitting down, half asleep, mildly annoyed about traffic. The restlessness you feel, that low, constant itch that there's somewhere else you ought to be, is one of the newest feelings a human can have. For almost everyone who came before you, it simply had no answer. The ridge on the horizon was the edge of the world, and that was the end of it. You are among the very first people in all of history who can just go any direction, farther in one afternoon than your great-great-grandparents traveled in their entire lives. And the strange thing in the end isn't that they stayed. It's that you can leave. And most days, you trace the same few streets anyway. The same 3 rooms. The same small handful of faces. You have a valley too. It's just made of habit now, instead of hills. The person standing in that green bowl of land 5,000 years ago, never once leaving. They weren't trapped. They were home. The only real question this whole story leaves you with is whether you are.